This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damian, David, and Matt.
Hey everybody, and welcome into another season preview here on the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Matt. I'm here today with David, and today we are going to talk about the Minnesota Twins. The Twins last year missed the playoffs, dealt with the same thing that they've dealt with for a while: injuries. Lots and lots and lots of injuries, and they're already dealing with them this year too. So, this is a team that has been hesitant to spend a lot of money, although they've made a couple signings in the past. They're a team that's been affected a little bit by the whole RSN TV deals, where the ownership has really wanted to cut back because of that. And they've been in a contention window, but they finally won a playoff series or a playoff game a couple of years ago, which was crazy that they had lost like 18 in a row or something. So there's been some form of success here, but it hasn't been fantastic. And we'll see. They're kind of getting to the end of their window. But David, what do you think the state of the Twins is on a kind of overall?
Yeah, you kind of tossed it in there, right? It feels like this is a team that got halfway up the mountain and stopped climbing. Is kind of the ultimate feeling, right? They signed Carlos Correa. They built a really good farm system. They were able to deploy into making big trades for guys like Pablo López. And then they just stopped. They didn't do anything this offseason. Effectively, we'll get into the adds and subtractions here, but I mean, this list is light. And, for a team that we just did our prediction show, yesterday in terms of recording time. Obviously, you guys will see this a little bit later, but I mean, we didn't pick this team. I don't think across the board. You might have.
I think I did.
You picked them, but me and Damian didn't pick them. And I feel like in a division this wide open, you have to be aggressive. You have to go out there and try and win this division because any one of four teams could very easily win this division. And it was the same case last year. And the Twins, correct me if I'm wrong, ended up not winning and not making the playoffs.
Yeah, they did not make the playoffs last year. They were close, but it just kind of fell apart when they had all the injuries. I mean, Buxton got hurt several times. Royce Lewis got hurt several times. Carlos Correa wasn't ever fully healthy. I think he played, and I can look into it here real quick. I think he played a lot of games. No, he only played 86 games last year. I was thinking the year before last, he played a lot of games, but he was kind of hobbled. He was very good in those 86 games last year. He actually had 4.3 WAR last year in 86 games, but he was, missed a lot of the season. So, it's going to be interesting to see where they go. But, we're looking forward. I guess we could talk about what they did this offseason, which is not a whole lot. They did make some moves. They brought in Danny Colombe. I don't even know how to say that name.
It's just Colombe, I think.
Danny Colombe. Yeah. They brought him over from the Orioles. He's a fine reliever, I guess, middle relief. They brought in Harrison Bader. He is what he is. He's a really good defensive center fielder. He can hit for contact a little bit, but he's not going to hit for a lot of power, and he's not going to get on base very well. So if you slot him ninth in your lineup for a few games and have him play defense in center field and not absolutely be awful at the plate, then that's a fine addition. But he is what he is. Ty France they brought in. That one's kind of interesting. He had a couple of good years at the beginning of his career with the Mariners, but then it just kind of fell off. And last year wasn't great. He was with a couple different teams last year, so we'll see if they're able to find something with him this year. He's somebody that's at least interesting to have been brought in here for this team. And then they added Iverson Castellano as a Rule 5 pick, and it sounds like he actually might be a part of this bullpen, so they might stick with him in the Rule 5. But David, I mean, I know the overall thing about the additions here is there's not enough of them, but I didn't mention Huascar Inoa on a minor league deal. He's kind of an interesting pitcher who has
Yep.
has shown some flashes in the past, but has dealt with a lot of injuries over the last couple of years. But David, do you think any of these help at all? Really?
Anti-France can, right? I think my favorite guy here is definitely Danny Colomb. I think he definitely slots in as kind of a lefty stopper in your bullpen. He was pretty good for the Orioles last year, but he's older, right? It is the kind of the knock on Danny Colomb. That's why he was kind of available for cheap in free agency. And this is a team that we mentioned the spending problems. That they're also trying to sell the team. This is an ownership group that's trying to get out of owning, and it's a tough spot to be in because you can't commit big dollars to long-term free agents when you're trying to sell, because that changes the value of your franchise in somewhat of a negative way. And it's funny how that works, right? You sign free agents to go win baseball games, and winning baseball games drives your value up. But before you win the games, your value goes down because you've got those extra dollars on your payroll. So it's an annoying, you spend money to make money, and you're not spending money and trying to sell and make the money. And it's kind of evident in this ad process because it's just barren. I don't like Harrison Bader at all. Don't think he brings anything to the table that, minor leaguer couldn't do at this point. Like, and he was the most interesting of the minor league signings. Like Iverson Castellanos is probably a good Rule 5 pick, but it's a guy with options that you can't send down. So that inflexibility actually hurts your roster building. Trying to grab a guy that maybe you transition back into a starter after he spends this year in the bullpen learning the ropes. But I mean, just a miserable free agent class from a team that needed to be a little bit better in order to contend in this AL Central division.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at the subtractions here, they lost Carlos Santana, who actually had a really good year for them last year. So that's honestly a pretty big loss. Max Kepler has been with the Twins for a long time. I think he had started to kind of just. I think his time was just up there. Honestly, I mean, even if the Twins were a team that was spending a lot of money, I don't know that they would have brought him back. I mean, he'd been there a long time. He had a down year last year. I don't know, like. That one hurts because he's been a long time Twin, and he's had some good years there. But they lost Kyle Farmer. They declined his option. Caleb Thielbar, he's not very good. Manuel Margot, they declined his option as well. And then Alex Kirilloff retired, and that one, Alex Kirilloff had not performed very well for the Twins. But that one does hurt because that's a former top prospect, and there was a lot of hype for him, and he only got to 3 years of service time and then retired. So, it's unfortunate. Hope everything with him is okay. It's pretty unusual to see a big leaguer retire that early. I hopefully everything's good with him. But yeah, these subtractions feel pretty impactful. I guess which one of these do you think hurts the most out of Santana, Kepler, Kirilloff? Because I think they're all pretty big deal for this team.
I think it's Santana, and I have been vocal on this podcast of being not the biggest Carlos Santana lover. I think he's a little bit overblown in terms of value, but when you look at the aggregate of bringing in Ty France to supplant the loss of Carlos Santana and Alex Kirilloff, you're not going to fill that production slot. I don't believe it, and this Twins team is in need of power, that's in need of on base, I think, because this is a whole bunch of guys who, but let me take that back. They don't really need power. The power's there. They don't have a whole lot of guys who get on base very well. It's a team that's kind of devoid of average, devoid of on base, but high in power. And if you're going to try and put together a lineup to compete in this Central, you needed a guy like Carlos Santana putting together not a 3-WAR year, but he just moved over to the Guardians. He's in your division still. So that's the biggest loss. I think it's directly impacting this team, this division. I think, Thielbar, they replaced with Colomb. That's fine. Right. Kyle Farmer and even Kirilloff, really, but Margot, just not really big impact guys. Kepler might impact the clubhouse. We'll see how that one goes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, I think Santana is the big loss here in terms of subtraction.
Yeah, I think so too. And of course you mentioned, with Kepler, they do have internal options at those spots who at the corner outfield that are probably similar production to what Kepler would have given you anyways. But I guess we can move on and talk about that. We'll go to the hitters page here. And Take a look at left field, where Kepler, one of the spots Kepler had played. Trevor Larnach is there in left field. Byron Buxton in center. Matt Wallner playing right field. They've got Royce Lewis, we hope, at third, but that's the injury I was referring to already. Starting the year on the IL with a hamstring strain, which is not good. Carlos Correa at short. Brooks Lee at second base. That's a big one to look out for this year. Ty France at first. Ryan Jeffers behind the plate. So, you know, the corner outfields are real similar. They're both left-handed hitters who strike out an absolute ton, have a lot of power. You know, really the key here is this lineup doesn't look all that bad if you consider the fact that if Buxton is healthy for 140 games, he's going to put up like 5 WAR. If Royce Lewis is healthy for 140 games, he's going to put up like 5 WAR. If Carlos Correa is healthy for 140 games, he's going to put up 5 WAR. And you start to add in these other pieces. I mean, Wallner's a fine player that they don't really have a major glaring weakness here
Right.
in their lineup. That's just like not a major leaguer. I think that there's also the potential for Brooks Lee to figure it out in the big leagues this year and put up a really good season. You know, he's a young guy. He was a top draft pick. He was a top 30 overall prospect in baseball. And he came up and he played 50 games last year and he struggled. But, you know, some of the struggles he had weren't things that you can't overcome. He had a really low batting average with balls in play last year, but he wasn't striking out a ton. I think Brooks Lee, and now there's a little bit of concern about how hard he hits the ball. So that's something to look out for. But,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think it's totally unplayable with him. So, and I didn't mention Willie Castro at DH, but David, out of this lineup, I mean, do you see any glaring weaknesses? And and the hypothetical that Buxton, Correa, and Lewis stay healthy, does that change your opinion if you could guarantee their health on this team?
I'll say no glaring weaknesses to answer the question, right? It seems like a solid lineup, but I will make this a point is that, we talk about the injury luck and stuff. Ultimately, at some point, guys show you who they are.
Yeah.
And it's kind of up to the point of us to determine that, but it's also up to the Twins to determine that level. When has Royce Lewis never playing in more than 50, 70 games? When does that mean that you have to plan around? Royce Lewis is not going to play 140 games. He's just not going to do it. Body can't handle it. It sucks. I would love to have a Royce Lewis full season. He would have it. He could have an MVP run, but he's not going to do it. We know he's not going to do it, right? Byron Buxton is not going to play 140 games in center field. Now, if he was, he DH'd a couple years ago and he played more games and he was ultimately worse for it. And when he got back to center field last year, he was better in his time there and he put up more WAR, but he was also hurt again. And at some point, these guys show you who they are, right? Carlos Correa had 2 different contracts declined because of his potential health problems. That's a guy that's going to get hurt, period. Like, end of story. That's why you have and keep a Willie Castro around. He can play all of those positions pretty well, but I'm not going to pencil that in, right? And so knowing that those injuries are coming, this lineup goes from being a very good lineup full of star caliber players to a lineup that does not scare me, and a lineup that is at 4th in this division easily, right? If you take those 3 guys out for any length of time, and they're going to miss times, and the Twins just have not been able to backfill with internal prospects. And I don't, we've got these guys down here, right? I don't think Walker Jenkins is getting to the big leagues this season, but he's worth noting.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Rodriguez might, and he might be the de facto jump into center field for when Buxton gets hurt at some point this year. But you can't count on rookies too. You need your star players to play, but these star players do not play. And that's very concerning. And if I'm, looking at this team with an outlook on 2025, I'm saying none of the players you're relying on are going to play the whole season. And we just can't bank on that. And they are clearly banking on it, and it's going to hurt them again.
Yeah, and I want to mention Keyshaw too. He's been he's been pretty good at spring training, and last year he was insanely good in the minor leagues. So we'll see if he ends up being up at some point this year as well. I want to point out one more thing: the bench here.
Yeah,
the bench is pretty good. I mean, you've got Vasquez is a really solid backup catcher. He'd be a starter for a lot of teams. Miranda is fine. He'll probably DH some too. Edouard Julien is really interesting. He walks a ton and he's got really good power. the strikeouts have been really high at times. So if he can cut that down at all, then that could be a really good, really good option there. If Brooks Lee struggles some, or putting him in at DH or at first base. I mean, he can play do any of those things. And then of course we mentioned Harrison Bader earlier. He's going to be a good bench player with his defense, base running, and then whatever he can get you at the plate, he can get you at the plate. But he's not somebody you want in your lineup every day, but he's a good bench player. So I guess we can move on and talk about the pitchers here real quick. And the pitching staff is pretty good in the starting rotation. Pablo Lopez. I've never been the biggest Pablo Lopez guy, but he's really solid. And I know that other people, like David here, really likes Pablo Lopez. So that's a good piece. I mean, at worst, if you're down on him, if you're not a believer like me, I feel like he's probably like a number 2-ish pitcher for a good team. But there's a world where Pablo Lopez is also like an ace caliber pitcher. So really good pitcher, really good start there. I really like Joe Ryan. Lots of strikeouts, not a lot of walks. He does give up the home runs occasionally, but he's got a pretty good. He's a pretty high floor pitcher at this point. I like him a lot. Bailey Ober has been pretty good for them. He's kind of similar to the control is really good for him. Also gets a pretty good amount of strikeouts. Solid pitcher there. Simeon Woods Richardson is kind of interesting. He's a former pretty high rated prospect. I'm not the biggest Simeon Woods Richardson believer, but he's worthy of, if he's your number 5, it's not the end of the world. And Chris Paddock is here as well. I think we got him listed as the number 5. I still see a world where Chris Paddock has some good years in the big leagues. I mean, when he's pitched, he's been pretty good, but he's another guy that injuries have really taken a toll on him at times. And, especially the fact he was limited so much coming up with his innings limits and everything that, it's kind of hard to imagine him really ever pitching a full workload in a successful manner. But I do like Chris Paddock's stuff. I think he's solid. So, David, do you think this starting 5 here is good enough to really to contend in this division? And I guess you can do your Pablo Lopez praise a little bit here too.
Well, I did my Pablo Lopez praise in our predictions
True.
episode.
Very true.
Go take a look. But spoiler alert, he's my dark horse Cy Young candidate. I think he, especially if he stays with the Twins, has a real chance to finally break out. But I've said that a couple of years now, right? And at some point that may not be true, right? He may just be the guy that's like a number 2. But for now, I'm always, that stuff is tantalizing, and it may be the Twins, it may not be the Twins that ends up unlocking him. But I do feel like there's another gear there. My favorite Joe Ryan statistic or trivia fact is that he got traded for Nelson Cruz, a half a year of Nelson Cruz from the Tampa Bay Rays to the Twins. So I love that one because, we always talk about how many trades the Rays win. They got owned by the Twins in that trade, and it's so much fun. Did. Louis Varland was my pitcher to watch out for as a potential breakout pick. I think he'll get some run, especially because, like you mentioned, Chris Paddock's going to miss time. Woods Richardson's not super reliable. Ultimately, as a whole, I like this rotation. I think it's a good rotation. It doesn't have the flash of the rest of the division, but it's still probably the 3rd best rotation in this division as it stands today, and probably across the whole season. Because I don't like the Guardians rotation at all. But at the end of it also isn't like it doesn't have the ceiling to get to 1-2. I don't think with Skubal and Reagan's dominating in this division. I just don't think it has the ceiling to get there unless Pablo Lopez pops off, which is possible. I mentioned it, but I think the scary part for this Twins team is that things may go poorly in the offense, which will put a lot of pressure on this rotation, which it did last year. And the rotation was not able to hold off enough losses to be able to keep them in the playoff race, despite being effectively the same rotation. And it was pretty good last year. But again, you're looking at a group that's going to struggle with run prevention down to the 2-3 runs. Like, I think eventually this whole group's going to give up 4 runs a game probably, but they probably need to have like historically good season to match when that offense ends up crashing because of the lack of the star players. So
Yeah, I do want to push back just a touch on this ceiling of this rotation not being able to uh, get to the top of this division. And the reason is because I think this rotation's got a lot more depth. They got a lot more options than the Royals and the Tigers. I mean, obviously the Royals and the Tigers have a pitcher who is better than Pablo Lopez, especially in my opinion, but in your opinion too, with Reagans and Scuball. But you look at the number twos. I mean, I think Joe Ryan lines up very well with Jack Flaherty, and I think he lines up very well with Seth Lugo as a number two. And you go beyond that, and I think Obear is better than the Tigers' number three. And I think that
unless it's Jackson Jobe,
unless Jackson Jobe absolutely goes off,
yeah.
but I think Obear it lines up very well with the Tigers' rotation, and then he also lines up very well with Waka. I think he's better than Waka. So you kind of look at that, and I'm not a huge Simeon Woods Richardson believer, and I don't believe that Chris Paddock's ever going to fully stay healthy. But I want to mention those prospects down there. Zabby Matthews was Damien's pick for Dark Horse Rookie of the Year, I think. Breakout pick. He was a breakout pick.
Yep. We had two breakout twins.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and Zabby Matthews is somebody who just never walks anybody, and that's been a thing that with this Twins staff is they've always got really good control. That's kind of something they seem to prioritize. So, that's something. And Zabby Matthews had a great spring. I'm assuming they're optioning him to AAA just for a little while to maybe limit his innings a tiny bit, and also probably because of options for other guys. But I'll be shocked if he's not in the big leagues pretty early. And also David Festa, he came up last year and had a really good start to his career in the major leagues. His ERA wasn't great, but if you dive into his numbers a little bit more, he actually performed really, really well. He got a ton of whiffs. Didn't walk a ton of guys. You could get to a little bit better than he did in his 64 innings on the walks, but it wasn't bad. The strikeouts weren't. I mean, the home runs weren't awful. They weren't great. But this is a pitcher who had about a 47% ground ball rate in the minor leagues, had a 36% ground ball rate in the big leagues last year. I think that number will probably stabilize. It's something that typically stays pretty similar from the minors to the big leagues. So I think David Festa is somebody to watch out for. And I think if those two guys are able to come into this rotation, maybe replace Simeon Woods Richardson, and then, one of them maybe replace somebody that gets injured or be a six-man rotation for a little while or something. I definitely think this rotation could be the deepest one in this division. I don't know if it's going to have the upside of Tariq Skubal, but they're definitely the deepest. And then you talk about pitching depth, and we haven't even mentioned the bullpen. And this might be one of the best bullpens in baseball. I mean, Joan Duran is – that guy's a freak. I mean, throwing 103 mile an hour fast. What is he? 99 mile an hour splitter. I mean, it's just. I don't know how you can. I mean, he's right up there with Emmanuel Clase and as the best closer in baseball in my opinion.
And what's funny is that Griffin Jax was better last year.
Yeah.
And that's what's really funny.
Griffin Jax is incredible.
Is that Griffin Jax outperformed Duran and took the closer's job last year. We have Duran slotted in at closer. Some of that was injury, right? But then Jax was just really good when he got the opportunity. And when Duran came back, he wasn't in that role anymore, simply. I think the Twins will probably revert that. But to have two guys that solid at the back of your bullpen, it doesn't even matter who else is in here. And I think this is a pretty solid bullpen. I don't know that I trust Cole Sands, Brock Stewart, or Alcala a ton, but I do really like Danny Colomb. I think he's reliable older reliever, but to have a back end like that is very, very good. There's only a couple of teams in baseball that have a back end 1-2 punch like this. There've been trade rumors swirling about anybody with a contract on this team. Those are guys that, if this team doesn't perform, will be extremely attractive at the deadline, will fetch a absolute haul, but also can lock down this, enough, competitiveness to where you're not blowing games, right? You're not blowing those close leads when they do score enough runs. And when this rotation, which is very good, inevitably puts, them in a position to win, this bullpen's going to lock it down a lot of the time. So the Twins are going to win a lot of games because of that, but organizationally, they may be leaning one way while the team is pulling them the other way. Is kind of how I feel. I mean, this pitching staff is really good, actually. I genuinely think, as we talked about it, I'm around on this pitch. I think the staff as a whole is very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I think this is a really good staff, and like I say, I think it could be the best overall pitching staff in this division. I really do. But moving on, we could talk about the outlook, and I think me and David are going to have a little bit of differing opinions here. But the over/under win total, David, what are you doing with this? 84.5.
Here's the problem, right? And this is what the point I was gonna make, and I kind of just went with to let's close it off. To say the pitcher staff's really good. I think that there's a pull, like a push and pull here going on, where the team is actually pretty good. I think this is a team that's going to be an over for sure. I think organizationally, the ownership group wants this to be an under. I think they want the team to be bad. I think they want to sell the deadline and open up the payroll for a new owner to come in and spend money. And in order to do that, the team needs to be bad. They need to have a legitimate decision to sell. And I don't think they're going to get there, right? But I do think this team is going to have some internal struggles because of all that. Some inner turmoil. I picked them to finish 4th in this division. So I have to go the under. And you picked them to win the division. So you have to go the over, right? But like I'll stick to the under, obviously, but I do think this team ends up like 78 wins. 80 wins, and they're right there in the division in July when they need to make the decision to sell. And it's going to be really tough, especially if the Twins don't decide to sell, right? Because I think, front office, they want to keep their jobs. They want to push for the playoffs. Players want to push for the playoffs. It's organizationally, there's divide here that is going to be really harmful to the overall outlook of this team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm taking the over. I think that sometimes we get a little bit too involved in talking about the ownership talk and everything, where I really don't think if this team is leading the division come July, the ownership's going to say we need to sell. I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
It would be more beneficial to the ownership for this team to stick together and to win the division and make the playoffs, so they can sell the team as a team that's currently competing and has a good roster. And and it's not like this team has a. If this was a team, if this was the Angels, where they have just huge bloated payroll of players like Anthony Rendon who aren't even playing, and God forbid Mike Trout, who is injured constantly too.
That's
even though he's actually, even though Mike Trout is actually trying to come back and play, he's, the Angels, it makes more sense to have to get rid of contracts to sell the team if Artie Moreno decides to sell again. For this Twins team, I mean, the payroll's still low. I mean, it's not a limiting factor really to the selling this team. So I don't know that there might be a case where they don't add a expensive player at the deadline because of what you're talking about. They might not get green lighted to increase their payroll at all if they're in it and they're looking like a contender. But I'll be shocked if they sell, if they're anywhere in, if they're within 4 or 5 games of the division lead. I'm sure they'll probably add a depth starter and a bullpen arm even. I'll be shocked if they actually sell players, at that point. But I'm going to take the over. I picked them to win the division. Odds to make the playoffs plus 100, odds to win the Central plus 210, odds to win the World Series are plus 2,500. Long odds to win the World Series, but this is basically a 50-50 shot to make the playoffs, as are I think the top 4 teams in this division basically. So going to be very interesting to see what happens here with the Twins in 2025 and what direction they head. But David, you got any final thoughts?
I like this team more than I thought I did. I think I probably misranked them. But at the same time, I don't know who I put over them is the issue. There's a lot of baseball to be played, and the Twins can go out here and shut me up, right?
Yeah.
And Twins fans, please leave comments about how wrong I am that the Twins are actually not gonna play well. But I think the injured players show you who they are. They're going to be injured again. They're going to have to fight through it again, and the same thing's going to happen as it did last year. And that's where I think if the ownership feels it's coming, that's where you would get that pull of the plug. And hope I'm wrong. This is a pretty decent team, but that's about it.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us on this episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.